In the heart of the vast, unforgiving Sahara desert, a legend persisted, whispered among nomads, recorded in half-forgotten scrolls, and told around flickering campfires where the night winds howled like distant spirits. It was the tale of Wakandire, a lost city of gold and splendor, where an ancient kingdom thrived under the rule of a dynasty so powerful that even the elements bowed to its will. Wakandire was said to have vanished from the world more than 1,000 years ago, swallowed by the sands of time. Its people, its treasures, and its secrets all disappeared without a trace. But the legend persisted, fueling the imaginations of treasure hunters, scholars, and adventurers alike. Some believed the city to be a myth, a story crafted by wandering tribes to explain the ruins scattered across the desert. Others believed it to be real, hidden away in the deepest parts of the Sahara, guarded by powerful spirits who would not allow any to find it without passing their trials. Among those who believed in the lost city was Dr. Amina Ayodele, a brilliant archaeologist and historian, a woman of undeniable intelligence and tenacity. She had spent the last decade of her life piecing together fragments of ancient texts, interviewing desert tribes, and examining artifacts long dismissed as worthless by other scholars. To her, the legend of Wakandire was not a fantasy but a puzzle, one she had dedicated her life to solving. Dr. Khaled stood in the dimly lit library of the University of Cairo, her sharp eyes scanning the brittle pages of an ancient manuscript. The text was written in Old Tamazight, the language of the Berber people, one of the many tribes believed to have once been connected to Wakandire. She had read the passage 100 times, but tonight, as the dusty beams of moonlight filtered through the cracked window, something new stood out to her. In the land where the stars are born and die, in the shadow of the golden dunes, the heart of the king sleeps. When the rightful heir returns, the city shall rise, and the desert shall part. Amina's heart raced, the heart of the king. She had come across this phrase before, scattered across different manuscripts, often dismissed as poetic nonsense. But now, in the context of her research, it seemed to point to something much more concrete, the rightful heir. Could it be that Wakandire was not just a city, but the seat of a forgotten royal line? She scribbled notes in the margins of her leather-bound journal, her thoughts swirling. For years, the search for Wakandire had been focused on locating its geographical position, but perhaps the key to finding it was not just about the right location, but the right bloodline. If there was indeed a lost heir, a descendant of the ancient kings, they might be the only one capable of unlocking the city's secrets. A knock at the door jolted Amina from her thoughts. She quickly closed the manuscript and turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man step into the room. Marcus Hargrove, her longtime friend and fellow explorer, gave her a lopsided grin as he leaned against the doorframe. "Still burning the midnight oil, I see," he said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Amina smiled and gestured to the piles of books and maps that surrounded her desk. "You know me, Marcus. The past never sleeps, and neither do I." He chuckled and walked over to her, glancing down at the open journal on her desk. "So, what's got you so engrossed this time? Another ancient curse, or perhaps a treasure map?" She met his gaze, her dark eyes gleaming with excitement. "Better. I think I've found the key to Wakandire." Marcus's grin faded into a look of cautious curiosity. "Wakandire? You've been chasing that ghost for years, Amina. You really think you're close this time?" "I'm certain of it," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "I've found references to a heart of the king in multiple texts. I believe it's not just a metaphor. The city is tied to an ancient royal bloodline, and the key to finding it might be in locating a descendant of that line." Marcus raised an eyebrow, folding his arms across his chest. "A lost heir? That sounds like something out of a fairy tale." Amina stood, walking over to a large map pinned to the wall. It was an old, hand-drawn map of the Sahara, with various points marked and scribbled notes in the margins. "Look here," she said, pointing to a region in the southwest, near the modern-day border of Algeria and Mali. "This area is known as the Heir Desert, one of the most remote and inhospitable parts of the Sahara. According to my research, the last recorded mention of Wakandire's royal family comes from a Berber tribe that once roamed this region. If there's any chance of finding a descendant of that family, it's here." Marcus stared at the map, his brow furrowed. "That's a dangerous place, Amina. It's not just the desert that'll kill you out there. There are bandits, warring tribes, and gods know what else. Are you sure about this?" She turned to face him, her expression unwavering. "I've spent my entire career searching for this city, Marcus. I'm not going to stop now, just because it's dangerous. Besides, I need your help. You've navigated those parts of the Sahara before. No one knows the desert like you do." He sighed, running a hand through his sandy blonde hair. "You know I can't say no to you. But if we're doing this, we'll need more than just the two of us. We'll need a team, and the right kind of protection." "I've already thought of that," Amina said with a grin. "I've reached out to a few contacts, people who specialize in desert expeditions, and a few, shall we say, more unconventional experts." Marcus smirked. "Unconventional, huh? This should be interesting." A week later, Amina and Marcus found themselves in the bustling marketplace of Agadez, a desert town on the edge of the Sahara, known as the gateway to the Tanner. The sun blazed down on them, the heat rippling in the air as merchants shouted from their stalls, selling everything from colorful fabrics to camel meat and spices. Amina adjusted the scarf wrapped around her head to shield herself from the sun, her eyes scanning the crowd. She had arranged to meet the rest of their team here, at a small cafe on the outskirts of the market, but so far there was no sign of them. "Are you sure they got the message?" Marcus asked, wiping sweat from his brow as they walked through the throngs of people. "They'll be here," Amina replied confidently. "I chose them for their reliability." They reached the cafe, a shaded, open-air establishment with low tables and colorful cushions scattered around. Amina ordered 2 mint teas from the vendor, and they sat down to wait. As they sipped their drinks, a tall, slim figure approached from the far end of the cafe. "Dr. Khalid, I presume," the man said, his voice smooth and accented, with a hint of European refinement. Amina looked up and smiled. "Yes, and you must be Luca di Luca." Luca nodded and took a seat across from them, his sharp blue eyes scanning the surroundings as if constantly assessing potential threats. An Italian adventurer and treasure hunter with a reputation for getting out of impossible situations, Luca had been recommended to Amina by a mutual acquaintance. "I've heard a lot about you," Amina said, leaning forward. "Your reputation precedes you." Luca smiled wryly. "I hope it's mostly good. Depends on who you ask," Marcus muttered under his breath, though there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. "I understand you're looking for something quite extraordinary," Luca said, ignoring Marcus's comment. "A lost city in the middle of the Sahara. Sounds like a challenge." "It will be," Amina replied, "but I believe the rewards will be worth it. If Wakandire is real, the archaeological and historical value alone is incalculable. Not to mention what treasures we might uncover." "Treasure, eh?" Luca's eyes sparkled with interest. "Now you've got my attention." Before Amina could respond, another figure appeared at the entrance of the cafe. This time it was a woman, tall and muscular, with dark skin and a serious expression. She wore a loose-fitting desert robe and a scarf wrapped around her head, though Amina could see the hilt of a sword peeking out from beneath her cloak. "You must be Fatimah al-Hassan," Amina said as the woman approached. Fatimah nodded curtly and sat down next to Luca without a word. A former soldier in the Algerian army, Fatimah was known for her combat skills and her ability to navigate hostile desert environments. Amina had hired her not just for protection, but because she had grown up among the Tuareg, the blue-robed nomads who roamed the Sahara. If anyone could help them survive the journey ahead, it was Fatimah. Marcus gave Fatimah a nod of approval. "Good to have someone who knows their way around a fight," he said. Fatimah glanced at him and nodded, though her expression remained impassive. With their team assembled, Amina laid out the plan. They would travel by camel caravan deep into the Tanner, following the clues she had pieced together from ancient texts. Their destination was a remote region of the desert where, according to her research, the last remnants of Wakandire's royal bloodline had fled after the city's fall. But the journey would not be easy, The Tenere was known as the Desert of Deserts, a place of scorching heat, violent sandstorms, and endless dunes. It was also a region fraught with danger. From hostile tribes to smugglers and bandits, to reach their goal, they would need to rely on each other and their wits. As the sun began to set, casting the desert in hues of red and gold, the team gathered their supplies and set out on their journey. The sand stretched before them like an endless sea, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Wakandire awaited. The first days of their journey were grueling. The heat of the Sahara was relentless, and the sand seemed to stretch on forever, an unbroken expanse of gold and white. The camels plodded steadily through the dunes, their hooves sinking into the soft sand with each step. Amina rode at the front of the caravan, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where distant mountains shimmered in the heat. Despite the harsh conditions, the team pressed on, driven by the promise of what lay ahead. Amina's excitement was palpable, though she kept her emotions in check, knowing that the road ahead would only grow more difficult. Marcus, ever the practical one, kept a close eye on their supplies, making sure they had enough water and food to last the journey. Luca, true to his nature, seemed unfazed by the heat and the discomfort. He rode with a relaxed posture, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the landscape, ever watchful for signs of danger. Fatimah, on the other hand, was all business. She led the group with a quiet efficiency, her knowledge of the desert and its perils evident in every decision she made. On the fourth day, the winds began to pick up, and by noon, they were caught in the midst of a sandstorm. The sky darkened, and the wind howled as it whipped the sand into a furious cloud. The camels groaned in protest as the team huddled together, wrapping their scarves tightly around their faces to protect themselves from the biting sand. "We need to find shelter," Fatimah shouted over the roar of the storm, her voice barely audible. Amina nodded and pointed to a rocky outcrop in the distance, where a small cluster of boulders offered some protection from the wind. They urged their camels toward the rocks, fighting against the storm with every step. When they finally reached the outcrop, they dismounted and huddled together, using the rocks to shield themselves from the worst of the storm. The wind howled around them, the sand staining their skin and eyes. Amina pulled her scarf tighter and glanced at Marcus, who was crouched beside her, his face grim. "This storm could last for hours," Marcus said, his voice muffled by the fabric covering his mouth. "We need to conserve our water." Amina nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. As she peered out at the swirling sands, she couldn't help but feel that the desert was testing them, as though it were alive, challenging them to prove their worth. "Not all who seek Wakandire are worthy," the old Berber saying went. She had always dismissed it as superstition, but now, in the midst of the storm, she wasn't so sure. As the storm raged on, the team huddled together in silence, waiting for the winds to die down. Hours passed, and eventually, the storm began to subside, the wind losing its fury and the sky slowly clearing. When the storm finally passed, the landscape before them had changed. The dunes had shifted, and the horizon looked different, as though the desert had rearranged itself while they were hidden away. Fatimah stood and dusted off her robes, her expression unreadable. "We need to keep moving," she said. "The storm has set us back, but we can make up the time if we push through the night." Amina agreed, though the exhaustion was beginning to weigh on her. The journey was proving to be more difficult than even she had anticipated, but she refused to let it deter her. They were getting closer. She could feel it. The signs in the sand. As they continued deeper into the desert, strange things began to happen. It started with small, almost imperceptible occurrences. A shift in the wind, the sudden appearance of a bird where none should have been, a chill in the air despite the scorching heat. At first, Amina dismissed these as the tricks of a tired mind, but soon, the signs became too obvious to ignore. On the seventh day of their journey, as they were making camp for the night, Marcus called out to Amina. She hurried over to where he stood, staring down at the ground with a puzzled expression. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to the sand. Amina knelt beside him, her brow furrowing as she studied the marks in the sand. At first, they appeared to be nothing more than the natural patterns created by the wind, but as she looked closer, She realized that the marks formed a deliberate shape, a series of concentric circles, like the rings of a tree. "It's a symbol," Amina whispered, her heart racing. She had seen this symbol before, in ancient carvings and manuscripts related to Wakandire. Fatimah approached, her eyes narrowing as she examined the marks. "What does it mean?" Amina swallowed hard. "It's a sign that we're on the right path." Luca joined them, his expression unreadable. "Or it's a warning," he said quietly. Amina glanced at him, her stomach twisting with uncertainty. Could it be both? A sign and a warning? As night fell, the desert grew eerily quiet. The wind had stilled, and the stars above shone brightly in the clear sky. The team gathered around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. "We're getting close," Amina said, her voice filled with determination. "I can feel it." Marcus nodded, though his expression was cautious. "We need to be careful, Amina. The desert is unpredictable, and if the legends are true, Wakandire won't give up its secrets easily." Amina knew he was right, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something extraordinary. Wakandire was within their reach. She was sure of it. All they had to do was press on. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above them, Amina's thoughts drifted back to the old texts she had studied for years. There had always been whispers of something more, something ancient and powerful that guarded the lost city. Spirits, some said. Others spoke of traps and curses designed to keep outsiders away. But Amina didn't believe in curses. She believed in history, in facts and evidence. And yet, as the desert stretched out before them, vast and unyielding, she couldn't help but wondered if there was something more at play, something older than time itself.